You wake at 400 hours, same as you have for the past 15 years. The chrono display glows amber in the pre-dawn darkness of your habitat cube, and your body moves through the familiar motions, feet finding worn slippers, hands reaching for the same work clothes folded on the same chair. But something is wrong with the dawn. The air tastes different when you step into the corridor. There's a metallic tang that shouldn't be there, an organic sweetness that makes your tongue feel thick and wrong. You've supervised grain processing station Epsilon 7 for long enough to know every smell this place can produce. The dusty comfort of processed wheat, the sharp ozone from the atmospheric processors, even the acrid bite when the recycling systems need maintenance. This is something else entirely. You pause at the observation port, as you do every morning, to watch Demeter Prime's sun crest the eastern processing complexes. But today, you find yourself staring at stars that shouldn't be visible. Too many stars. Stars in patterns that your mind struggles to process, arranged in formations that seem to shift when you're not looking directly at them. The Vox system crackles to life with its morning announcements, but the familiar voice of shift coordinator Brennan is absent. Instead, there's only static punctuated by what might be breathing, or might be something else entirely. You reach for your personal Vox unit, thumb hovering over the activation stud. Who would you call? What would you even say? Morning shift workers to grain station Epsilon 7. Morning shift workers report for duty. The automated message plays as always, but no boots echo in the corridors below. No rumble of transport vehicles approaching from the worker habs. No familiar chatter of colleagues preparing for another day of feeding the Imperium. You realize with growing dread that you cannot remember hearing a single human voice since you woke. The silence presses against your eardrums like deep water, broken only by the mechanical systems that keep this place alive. The atmospheric processors hum their eternal song. The grain conveyors maintain their steady rhythm. The harvester mechs continue their preset patterns across fields that stretch beyond the horizon. Everything functions perfectly, except for the 12 billion human beings who should be making it function. You step outside the habitat dome, and the wrongness hits you like a physical blow. The Sky Emperor preserve you, what's wrong with the sky? The familiar purple-tinged atmosphere of dawn has taken on a sickly yellow quality, as if filtered through something organic, something alive. But it's the silence that truly terrifies you. Demeter Prime is never silent. This world breathes with the constant rhythm of agriculture on a galactic scale, the distant thunder of harvester convoys, the harmonic vibration of processing plants, the ever-present background noise of a world dedicated entirely to feeding 50 other worlds. Now there's nothing but the wind through grain stalks that seems subtly wrong, rustling with a sound like whispered secrets. What does it feel like when an entire world begins to die? You're about to find out. As you stand there, desperately trying to understand what your senses are telling you, a new sound reaches your ears. It's coming from the direction of the western grain fields, a rhythmic pulsing like a massive heartbeat. The sound is organic, wet, and utterly alien to this place of metal and grain and human industry. Something has come to Demeter Prime in the night. Something that has made 12 billion people simply stop. And as you listen to that alien heartbeat growing stronger, you begin to understand that whatever happened to them is about to happen to you. How long does it take for 12 billion people to realize they're already dead? The answer, you're learning, is exactly as long as it takes one person to wake up and notice they're gone. What would you do if you discovered you were not just witnessing the apocalypse but feeding it? You're about to discover that on Demeter Prime, these questions aren't philosophical. They're immediate, personal, and terrifyingly real. Because the thing about Agri-Worlds is that they're designed to feed things. The only question is whether those things will remain human. The organic heartbeat grows louder, and you realize with crystalline clarity that your world, your beautiful, productive, life-giving world, has become something else entirely during the few hours you slept. It has become a dinner table. To understand what's happening to you, what's happening to Demeter Prime, You need to understand what this world was before it became a feeding ground. You need to comprehend the scale of what's being consumed. Your family, the Voss lineage, has worked these fields for 5 generations. Your great-great-grandfather, Matthias Voss, arrived on the first colonial ships when this world was nothing but endless grasslands and the promise of soil so rich it could feed the Imperium. 5 generations of your blood and sweat and dreams are embedded in every grain of processed wheat, every metric ton of protein paste, every calorie that's kept Imperial worlds from starvation. Demeter Prime isn't just an Agri-World, it's the Agri-World. If ancient Terra's entire agricultural output could feed one hive city, Demeter Prime feeds 50 worlds like Terra. 12 billion human beings call this place home, but they're not really inhabitants in any traditional sense. They're components in the largest food production system ever conceived by human minds. Picture this: grain fields that stretch from horizon to horizon, so vast that weather patterns form above them. Processing facilities the size of cities, where a single day's harvest could feed 1 billion people. Underground storage caverns carved from bedrock, each one capable of holding enough grain to prevent famine on an entire world for a standard year. This is agriculture as warfare against hunger, conducted on a scale that defies human comprehension. Your morning routine, the one so brutally interrupted by wrongness, was part of a symphony played by 12 billion people in perfect, Imperial-mandated harmony. Shift workers who have never seen natural soil, because they spend their lives tending hydroponic gardens in kilometer-deep underground facilities. Transport operators who move harvester mechs the size of Imperial Guard super-heavy tanks. Atmospheric engineers who fine-tune the very air to optimize growing conditions across continental crop zones. The Voss family quarters, your home, sits atop processing station Epsilon 7, which handles the grain output of roughly 2 million square kilometers. From your observation dome, on a clear day, you can see the geometric precision of cultivation that extends to the curve of the horizon itself. Wheat varieties engineered for maximum caloric yield wave in perfectly straight rows. Protein synthesis plants that look like metallic forests process nutrients into forms that can survive decades in storage. Everything designed, optimized, and maintained for one purpose: keeping the Imperium fed. But here's what you never fully grasped, what none of the 12 billion ever truly understood. This magnificent, life-giving system is also the perfect trap. Agri-worlds like Demeter Prime represent humanity at its most vulnerable. Every gram of soil has been optimized for production rather than defense. Every atmospheric processor prioritizes crop yield over strategic capability. The same monoculture efficiency that makes this world capable of feeding 50 others also makes it incapable of feeding itself if anything goes wrong. You've seen the defense installations, of course. Orbital defense platforms that look impressive until you realize they're designed to repel pirates and raiders, not other things. PDF regiments equipped for civil unrest and the occasional heretic uprising. Ground-based weapons systems intended to protect processing facilities from sabotage. What you've never seen, what none of the Agri-worlds possess, is the kind of military infrastructure needed to fight a war against something that eats planets. The Imperial tithes demand absolute efficiency. Every calorie produced belongs to the throne. Every worker exists to serve the harvest. Every decision prioritizes output above all other considerations, including survival. The planet's entire population depends completely on Imperial protection, because Agri-worlds can't protect themselves. They're too busy keeping the Imperium alive to worry about staying alive themselves. The beautiful, tragic irony is that places like Demeter Prime represent everything noble about human civilization: the triumph over hunger, the transformation of hostile worlds into gardens of plenty, the willing sacrifice of individual comfort for the greater good of humanity. Generations of families like yours have built something genuinely magnificent here. But you've built it in a universe where magnificence attracts predators. The same atmospheric processors that create perfect growing conditions also pump chemical signatures into space that can be detected from light years away. The same genetic modifications that maximize crop yields also create biochemical patterns that scream abundant organic resources to anything listening. The same transportation networks that move food efficiently also create infrastructure that can be repurposed for other types of distribution. If Earth's entire agricultural output fed one city, Demeter Prime feeds 50 worlds like Earth. Which means that when something comes to devour Demeter Prime, it's not just consuming a world, it's consuming the equivalent of 50 Earths worth of carefully cultivated, genetically optimized, perfectly organized organic material. You're beginning to understand why the silence is so complete, why 12 billion people could simply vanish between sleep and waking, why that organic heartbeat from the western fields sounds so satisfied, so fed. Demeter Prime didn't just happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Demeter Prime is exactly what something was looking for, a world that has spent 2 centuries turning itself into the perfect meal. And you, Jorik Voss, 5th-generation servant of the harvest, are about to witness what happens when the dinner bell rings in the void, and something vast and hungry answers the call. 3 days before you woke to wrongness and silence, Senior astropath Melina Kor was having the first of what she would later describe, in her final fragmentary transmissions, as the hungry dreams. 20 years of service in the astropathic choir had taught Kor to distinguish between the various flavors of psychic phenomena that drift through the warp. She knew the electric tang of approaching Imperial vessels, the oily wrongness that preceded chaos incursions, the crystalline clarity that marked Eldar presence. But this was something new, something that made her augmetic implants ache and her third eye weep tears that tasted of copper and fear. Put yourself in her position. You've spent 2 decades listening to the psychic whispers of the galaxy, your mind trained and modified to process information that would drive unprotected humans insane. You've guided supply convoys through warp storms and detected incoming threats months before they could threaten Imperial worlds. You are, in every sense that matters, the early warning system for this entire sector of space. And you're beginning to realize that something is coming that shouldn't exist. It starts with the stellar cartography reports, routine astronomical observations that don't make sense when you examine them closely. Stars going dark in patterns that suggest something massive moving between them and Demeter Prime. Not ships. The occlusion patterns are wrong for any vessel in Imperial records. Something organic, something that grows rather than builds, that adapts rather than engineers. You request enhanced auger sweeps of the affected regions, but the reports that come back are worse than useless. The machine spirits of the scanning equipment are producing data that contradicts itself. Massive gravitic signatures that suddenly vanish, energy readings that suggest biological activity on a planetary scale, movement patterns that follow no logical trajectory, but nevertheless seem to be approaching with inexorable purpose. The first time you try to psychically probe the phenomenon directly, the backlash nearly kills you. Imagine, if you can, what it feels like to touch a mind that contains billions of other minds, all operating in perfect, horrifying harmony. Imagine the sensation of intellect so vast and alien that your human consciousness can't process its edges, let alone its depth. Imagine hunger, not the simple biological need for food, but hunger as a cosmic force, as fundamental to existence as gravity or time. Now imagine that this vast, alien intelligence notices you noticing it. The psychic scream that tears through the astropathic choir chamber leaves 3 junior astropaths catatonic and shatters every piece of glass in the facility. You find yourself on the floor, blood streaming from your augmetic ports, the taste of alien hunger still coating your thoughts like acid. But worse than the pain is the knowledge that something out there in the void has felt you touching it, has registered your presence, and has filed you away under food resources to be collected. You spend the next 18 hours composing what you hope will be a coherent warning to the nearest Imperial Navy installation. The words feel inadequate, too small to contain the cosmic horror you've glimpsed, but you force yourself to be precise. Unknown Xenos presence detected. Massive scale. Biological characteristics. Approaching Demeter Prime. Request immediate military intervention. Estimated arrival. The calculations make your hands shake. Based on the movement patterns, the gravitational disturbances, the rate at which stars are being occluded, you estimate the phenomenon will reach Demeter Prime in approximately 72 hours. You transmit the warning with every erg of psychic power you can safely channel, broadcasting on emergency frequencies to every Imperial installation within range. The effort leaves you unconscious for 6 hours, but you wake with the satisfaction of duty fulfilled. Help will come. The Navy will investigate. Whatever this thing is, it will meet the full response of Imperial military might, except the responses when they come are wrong. Astropath core, unable to confirm your readings. Augur sweeps show normal stellar phenomena, suggest equipment recalibration. Demeter Prime Astropathic Station, your warning transmission contains significant data corruption. Please retransmit with clearer parameters. Senior Astropath, Planetary Governor Vex requests meeting to discuss your concerns. Standard Xenos protocols remain in effect. You realize with growing horror that they can't see it. The thing approaching Demeter Prime exists in a psychic blind spot that affects everyone except those cursed with your particular sensitivity. The military commanders who should be mobilizing fleets see only normal space. The planetary governors who should be evacuating populations detect no threat worth acknowledging. It's then that you understand what the shadow and the warp truly means. This isn't just a Xenos fleet approaching with stealth technology. This is something that creates a bubble of psychic darkness around itself, something that makes the universe forget it exists until the moment it chooses to reveal itself. Your warnings aren't being ignored. They're being prevented from being understood, filtered out of reality by the approaching presence itself. The hunger you touched during that first psychic probe isn't just appetite. It's intelligent appetite, evolved over eons to make prey complicit in their own consumption. The shadow in the warp doesn't just hide the approach of the Hive fleet. It makes potential victims unable to process the concept of their own danger. On the final day, as the wrongness in space becomes visible even to unaugmented eyes, you make one last desperate attempt to warn anyone, who might listen. Governor Vex agrees to see you, but when you try to explain what's coming, the words transform in your mouth. The shadow has grown strong enough to affect even direct speech. You hear yourself saying minor stellar phenomena when you mean to say planet-killing swarm. You watch the governor's eyes glaze over with artificial calm when you try to convey the scale of the approaching horror. It's then that you feel the first tendrils of the Hive Mind pressing against your consciousness, not with violence, but with something far worse, curiosity. The vast intelligence behind the shadow is examining you like a specimen, cataloging your abilities, your knowledge, your terror. It's learning from your very attempt to resist it. Your final entry in the astropathic logs, recorded with hands that shake so badly you can barely operate the Vox recorder, contains a truth that no one will understand until it's too late. The stars aren't going dark. Something is eating the light, something that grows stronger every time we fail to see it coming. By the time you can perceive the threat, you're already inside its mouth. The recording ends with a sound that might be screaming, or might be the psychic echo of 12 billion people who don't yet know they're about to become food. When morning comes, and you, Jorik Voss, wake to silence and wrongness, Melina Kor is still alive in her chamber. But the thing looking out through her eyes is no longer entirely human. It's learning to speak with her voice, learning to think with her thoughts, preparing to help coordinate the harvest that's about to begin. The shadow in the warp doesn't just hide the approach of the swarm. It ensures that by the time the prey realizes what's happening, they're already part of the hunting party. The workers began disappearing on a Tuesday. Not all at once. That would have triggered alarms, investigations, the kind of attention that might have given Demeter Prime a fighting chance. No, the disappearances were surgically precise, targeted with an intelligence that understood human psychology better than humans understood themselves. Field Supervisor Marta Chen was the first to notice the pattern, though she wouldn't recognize it as a pattern until much later, when pattern recognition became a matter of survival rather than curiosity. You know Marta. She runs the Eastern Agricultural Sector, manages 7,000 workers across a harvesting zone that produces enough grain to feed an entire hive world. Efficient, dedicated, the kind of person who notices when productivity metrics shift by even fractional percentages. Which is why it bothered her when the overnight shift in Sector 7 Alpha came up short by exactly 12 workers, not 13, which might suggest an accident or transport failure, not 11, which could indicate a minor scheduling error, exactly 12. The precise number needed to create a statistically insignificant gap in the workforce, small enough to avoid triggering automated reports, large enough to matter if you knew what to look for. The explanation came back routine. Worker reassignment to Priority Sector 9 Gamma, updated schedules distributed. But when Marta checked with Sector 9 Gamma, they had no record of receiving additional personnel. And when she tried to track down the specific workers who'd been reassigned, their identification codes led to personnel files that existed but contained subtle inconsistencies, birth dates that didn't quite match previous records, work histories with gaps that hadn't been there before. Someone or something was editing reality in real time. The second wave of disappearances happened in the underground irrigation systems. Maintenance crews who descended into the vast network of tunnels that carry water and nutrients to the root systems of continental crop zones. These weren't random workers. They were specialists, people who knew every pipe and valve in the subsurface infrastructure, people whose disappearance would create specific vulnerabilities in specific systems. Tech adept Marcus Threll, responsible for Irrigation Network Delta, filed the first report that used the word impossible in an official document. His crews had discovered what appeared to be additions to the irrigation system, organic growths that interfaced seamlessly with the mechanical components, improving efficiency while serving some unknown secondary purpose. The biomechanical integration displays sophistication beyond current Imperial biotechnology, Threll reported. The organic components appear designed to optimize nutrient flow while simultaneously collecting samples. Recommend immediate investigation by specialized xenobiology teams. The response came back within hours. Report filed. Continue normal operations. Biologist teams assigned to review at next scheduled maintenance cycle. Which would have been fine, except the next scheduled maintenance cycle was 3 months away. And the organic growths were expanding at a rate that suggested they'd be integrated into 90% of the irrigation network within a week. Meanwhile, in the vast grain storage facilities, Medici Officer Yalan Voss, your distant cousin, another branch of the family tree that had grown deep roots in Demeter Prime soil, was treating what appeared to be an outbreak of allergic reactions among the silo workers. Respiratory issues, skin irritation, unusual fatigue. Symptoms that seemed to affect workers who'd been exposed to grain from specific storage units. But here's what made Yalan's hands shake as she compiled her medical reports. The grain itself was changing. Not obviously. The modifications were subtle enough to pass standard quality inspections. But under detailed analysis, the molecular structure showed signs of enhancement, improved protein content, increased caloric density, chemical markers that suggested the grain was being optimized for something other than human consumption. The grain appears to be developing symbiotic properties, she wrote in her final report. Enhanced nutritional value achieved through integration of unknown organic compounds. Workers exposed to modified grain show improved physical performance in short term, but long-term effects unclear. Recommend isolation protocols until. The report was never finished. That night, Yalen Voss vanished from her quarters. The last entry in her personal log, discovered days later by PDF investigators, contained a single line. "I understand now. We're not the farmers. We never were." The truth was revealing itself in pieces too small for any individual to comprehend, but too large for the collective unconscious of Demeter Prime to ignore. In the eastern sectors, children began playing games that hadn't existed the week before, elaborate scenarios involving the hungry dark and feeding time. In the processing plants, workers reported dreams where they found themselves willingly walking into vast digestive chambers, feeling not terror but a sense of coming home. PDF Sergeant Kane made the first confirmed contact with what the reports would later classify as hostile xenos organisms in processing plant Gamma 15. His patrol had been investigating reports of equipment malfunction, harvester mechs that were operating beyond their programmed parameters, processing grain in ways that defied their original design specifications. What Kane found in the plant's lower levels changed the definition of the word malfunction forever. The harvester mechs hadn't malfunctioned. They had been improved. Organic components integrated so seamlessly with mechanical systems that it was impossible to tell where machine ended and organism began. The mechs were still processing grain, but they were also processing something else, something that Kane's mind refused to fully acknowledge even as he recorded it in his official report. Encountered unknown biological entities interfacing with agricultural equipment. Entities appear to be optimizing harvest procedures while collecting data, possibly genetic material, request backup and specialized equipment for containment. The backup never came. By the time Kane's report reached PDF command, the officers who should have responded were dealing with similar incidents across 17 different facilities. The pattern was spreading faster than any response could be coordinated, adapting faster than any containment protocol could be implemented. But the worst realization came when Kane tried to describe the entities he'd encountered to his fellow PDF troopers. The words wouldn't come. Not because he'd forgotten or because he was traumatized, but because something was actively preventing him from communicating what he'd seen. The same shadow that had clouded Astropath Corps' warnings was now operating at a much more intimate level, editing memories in real time, ensuring that each individual crisis remained isolated from every other individual crisis. By the time you, Jorik Voss, wake to wrongness and silence, the infection has been spreading through Demeter Prime for 6 days. 6 days of surgical infiltration, systematic replacement, and careful preparation. The workers haven't disappeared, they've been recruited. The equipment hasn't been destroyed, it's been optimized. The world hasn't been invaded, it's been improved. The horror isn't that something alien has come to Demeter Prime. The horror is that after 6 days of careful integration, it's becoming impossible to tell where Demeter Prime ends and the alien begins. The process of consumption has been so gradual, so precise, that the world is digesting itself from the inside out. And the most terrifying part, for those who have been recruited into the process, it doesn't feel like destruction. It feels like evolution, like coming home, like finally understanding what they were always meant to become. The silence you woke to isn't the silence of death. It's the silence of 12 billion people who have stopped screaming because they've started to understand why they needed to be consumed. They're still here, somewhere, still conscious, still human enough to remember what they used to be. But they've been integrated into something larger, something that values their knowledge and memories and skills too much to waste them on something as crude as death. They're becoming part of the harvest, and so are you. The towers began growing at sunrise. You watch from the observation dome of Processing Station Epsilon 7 as the familiar geometry of Demeter Prime's agricultural landscape transforms into something that belongs in nightmares rather than in the waking world. Where yesterday there were grain fields extending to the horizon, today there are structures, massive, organic spires that pulse with alien life, reaching toward the sky like the fingers of some buried colossus clawing its way toward the surface. The towers are beautiful, in the way that efficient death is beautiful. They rise from the earth with architectural precision, their surfaces rippling with patterns that suggest both plant growth and circulatory systems. Each one stands roughly 2 kilometers tall, tapering to points that seem to taste the atmosphere as they pierce the sky. And they're growing faster than anything has a right to grow. You can actually see them expanding, reaching upward at a rate that suggests they'll double in height before the day ends. But it's not the impossible growth rate that makes your hands shake as you grip the observation rail. It's the recognition. These aren't alien structures imposed on Demeter Prime's landscape. They're Demeter Prime's landscape, transformed. The grain fields haven't been destroyed, they've been incorporated. You can see wheat stalks integrated into the tower walls, still producing grain but now serving as components in a vastly larger organism. The capillary towers, for that's what your mind insists on calling them, though you have no idea why you know that term, aren't just growing from the soil. They're growing from the infrastructure you've spent 15 years helping to maintain. Processing pipes that once carried grain now pulse with organic fluids. Atmospheric processors hum with new purpose, their exhaust plumes tinged with chemicals that make the air taste of copper and anticipation. Transportation networks still function, but the cargo they carry has changed in ways that make your stomach clench with sympathetic hunger. From your elevated position, you can see the true scale of the transformation. The towers aren't randomly distributed. They form a pattern across Demeter Prime's surface, a network of organic nodes that stretches beyond the horizon. Each tower is connected to its neighbors by root-like structures that run just beneath the soil, creating a planetary nervous system that processes information and resources with terrifying efficiency. But here's what makes you stumble backward from the observation port, bile rising in your throat. The towers are using the existing agricultural infrastructure. The irrigation systems now carry nutrients to feed the growing biomass. The atmospheric processors maintain optimal growing conditions for alien organisms. The harvester mechs continue their work, but they're no longer harvesting grain for human consumption. They're harvesting genetic material for something else entirely. You watch, transfixed with horror, as one of the massive harvester units approaches a newly grown capillary tower. The machine extends mechanical arms that interface seamlessly with organic ports on the tower's surface. For a moment, you see data transfer, not just information, but something more fundamental. The harvester mech is downloading biological templates, learning patterns, incorporating new instructions into its operational matrix. When it moves away from the tower, the harvester mech has changed. Its movements are smoother, more purposeful. Its processing chambers have been modified with organic components that serve functions you can't identify, but that fill you with instinctive dread. It's still recognizably the same machine, but it's become something more. Something that serves purposes beyond human comprehension. And everywhere you look, you see the same process of integration and improvement. Atmospheric processors sprouting organic sensor arrays. Storage facilities whose walls pulse with living tissue. Transportation networks that move resources with efficiency that exceeds their original design parameters by orders of magnitude. The most horrible realization comes when you focus on the human element still visible in the transformed landscape. Workers are still present. You can see them moving between the capillary towers, maintaining equipment, tending to crops. But their movements have the same purposeful efficiency as the modified machinery. They're not prisoners or slaves, they're participants. Willing components in a system that has convinced them their original purpose was merely the first stage of their evolution. You recognize some of them through the observation scope. Marta Chen, the field supervisor who first noticed the pattern of disappearances, now moves between towers with the fluid grace of someone who has found their true calling. Tech adept Threll operates biomechanical interfaces with an expertise that suggests he's been trained by the organism itself. Even your cousin Yalan is visible, tending to what appear to be nurseries where human genetic material is being cultivated for purposes that make your mind recoil from understanding. They're not just alive, they're thriving. The integration process has given them capabilities beyond normal human parameters. Enhanced strength, improved sensory perception, direct interface with biomechanical systems. They've become more than human by becoming part of something inhuman. But it's the children that break something fundamental in your psyche. Groups of young ones play among the capillary towers, laughing with joy that sounds genuine and unforced. They run through biomechanical gardens where wheat grows alongside organisms that have no names in any human language. They tend to nursery pools where new life gestates in forms that blend human and alien characteristics so seamlessly that the distinction becomes meaningless. And they're happy. That's what makes you slide down the observation dome wall to sit on the floor with your head in your hands. The children aren't traumatized or coerced. They've been given a purpose larger than themselves, and they've embraced it with the wholehearted enthusiasm that only children can manage. You understand, with crystalline clarity, that you're not witnessing the destruction of Demeter Prime. You're witnessing its apotheosis. The world is becoming what it was always meant to become, not just a source of food, but a component in a system of consumption that operates on galactic scales. The agricultural expertise that 5 generations of your family helped develop hasn't been destroyed. It's been absorbed. The Hive Mind now knows everything that Demeter Prime knew about farming, about crop rotation, about maximizing yield from cultivated land. But it's applying that knowledge in service of goals that make human civilization look like a child's first attempt at gardening. Through the biomechanical networks spreading across the world's surface, you can sense the presence of the larger organism. It's vast beyond comprehension, patient beyond human understanding, and intelligent in ways that make human genius seem like crude fumbling. It doesn't hate humanity. Hate requires caring enough about something to want it destroyed. Instead, it appreciates humanity the way you might appreciate a useful tool or a particularly nutritious meal. You realize that you have a choice to make, and that the choice is more terrible than any human being should have to face. You can resist, maintaining your individual identity until the integration process overcomes you by force. Or you can surrender, allowing yourself to become part of something larger, something that will value your knowledge and experience while transforming you into an instrument of cosmic consumption. The horrible part is that surrender is beginning to seem like the reasonable option. The integrated humans you can observe seem genuinely fulfilled, working toward goals that dwarf anything individual human ambition could achieve. They're part of something that will outlast civilizations, something that treats entire worlds as components in projects that span millennia. As you sit in the gathering darkness, listening to the organic heartbeat of the capillary towers, you begin to understand what your cousin Yalan meant in her final log entry. We're not the farmers. We never were. You were always the crop. Humanity has always been the crop. And now, finally, it's harvest time. The only question remaining is whether you'll fight the Reaper or help it swing the scythe. Colonel Miranda Thorne has been a soldier for 37 years, and she's never faced an enemy that grew stronger by eating her ammunition. You find yourself crouched beside her in the ruins of what used to be Demeter Prime's planetary capital, watching through rubble-strewn windows as her planetary defense force makes their final stand against an enemy that defies every tactical principle she's ever learned. The irony isn't lost on either of you. She spent 3 decades learning how to kill things efficiently, and now she's facing something that becomes more efficient at killing by studying how she tries to kill it. The PDF bunkers, built to withstand orbital bombardment and siege warfare, have held for exactly 18 hours against the Tyranid assault. Not because the defenses are inadequate. Thorne's people have fought with skill and courage that would make Imperial Guard veterans proud. They've held because the Tyranids have been allowing them to hold, studying their tactics, learning their strategies, incorporating their defensive innovations into new bioforms that emerge from the capillary towers faster than human minds can process. Watch the ammunition expenditure, Thorn voxes to her remaining squad leaders, though you can hear the defeat in her voice. We're down to 40% reserves and requisitions. She pauses, looking at the Vox unit that connects her to supply depots that no longer exist. Requisitions are unavailable. The horrible mathematics of their situation are simple enough for anyone to understand. Every shot fired teaches the enemy something new. Every explosive detonated provides genetic samples from the creatures it kills. Every tactical innovation gets absorbed, analyzed, and countered by bioforms that emerge from the growing towers within hours. Sergeant Kane, the same Kane who made first contact with the infiltrating organisms, serves as Thorn's tactical liaison with the civilian defense groups that have formed throughout the capital. His reports paint a picture of heroism that accomplishes nothing and sacrifice that serves only to feed the enemy's understanding of human psychology. Militia Group Alpha held Intersection 7 Gamma for 4 hours, Kane reports, his voice steady despite the futility of what he's describing. Eliminated approximately 200 hormagaunts using improvised explosives and coordinated small arms fire. Enemy response: deployment of new bioform with enhanced carapace armor specifically designed to counter explosive devices. Militia Group Alpha subsequently overrun. No survivors, but he pauses, consulting his data slate. But genetic material appears to have been collected rather than consumed. That last detail is what makes the situation truly horrific. The Tyranids aren't just killing the defenders, they're recruiting them. The fallen PDF troopers and civilian militia members don't stay dead long enough for proper grief. Within hours, they're back in the field as integrated bioforms, retaining enough of their original knowledge and tactical expertise to serve as specialized combat units. You watch through the bunker's observation slit as a squad of what were once PDF heavy weapons specialists advance on a civilian shelter, moving with military precision but serving alien purposes. They know exactly where to place their shots for maximum psychological impact. They understand human defensive psychology well enough to offer false hope before crushing it systematically. They've retained their humanity just long enough to make their betrayal of it perfectly effective. Tech Priest Gamma 7 represents the Adeptus Mechanicus contingent assigned to Demeter Prime's defense, but his usual religious certainty has been shaken by encounters with technology that surpasses Mechanicus' understanding. His servoskulls return with data that contradicts everything the cult Mechanicus teaches about the relationship between flesh and machine. The Xeno's bioforms display technological integration that approaches theoretical perfection, he reports, his augmetic voice modulator struggling to convey concepts that strain his programming. Organic components interface with mechanical systems at the molecular level. The distinction between biological evolution and technological advancement becomes meaningless. This represents. He can't finish the statement, because finishing it would require acknowledging that the Omnissiah's perfect fusion of flesh and machine has already been achieved by something that exists outside Imperial doctrine. But it's the civilian defense coordinator, Elena Vasquez, who provides the most heartbreaking reports. She's been organizing the evacuation of non-essential personnel to underground shelters, trying to save lives that everyone knows can't actually be saved. Her updates chronicle humanity at its best and worst, incredible courage in service of impossible hope, sacrifice that accomplishes nothing except to demonstrate that humans will fight for each other even when fighting is meaningless. Shelter Complex 12 reports successful defense against initial probing attacks, Vasquez transmits, and you can hear her trying to maintain professional optimism. Civilian volunteers have constructed effective barriers using agricultural equipment. Estimated supplies sufficient for 36 hours, assuming normal consumption rates. What she doesn't say, what none of them can bear to say, is that the Tyranids aren't trying to break into the shelters. They're studying the shelters, learning how humans organize when desperate, cataloging the social structures that emerge under extreme pressure. The civilian volunteers aren't defending anything. They're providing behavioral data for bioforms that specialize in breaking human morale with surgical precision. The most devastating realization comes during what Thorne designated Operation Last Light, a coordinated strike against the nearest capillary tower, intended to disrupt the biomechanical network and give the civilian population time to die on their own terms rather than serve as genetic material for alien consumption. The operation succeeds brilliantly. PDF veterans and civilian militia work together to penetrate the tower's defenses, plant explosive charges at structural weak points, and detonate enough ordnance to bring down a structure that scraped the sky. For a few precious minutes, it seems like human courage and determination might actually accomplish something meaningful. Then the fallen tower begins to regrow, incorporating the explosive residue, the destroyed bioforms, and the genetic material of the fallen attackers into its new structure. Within hours, it's taller than before, more resilient than before, and defended by bioforms that have learned to counter every tactic the operation employed. But the worst part, the detail that breaks Colonel Thorne's legendary composure, is that the new bioforms moving around the regrown tower include recognizable features from the PDF troopers who died in the attack. Not crude copies or simple reanimation, but integration. The enemy has absorbed their courage, their tactical knowledge, their loyalty to each other, and turned those qualities into weapons for the next engagement. They're not just killing us, Thorne explains to her remaining officers, her voice carrying the weight of someone who's realized that victory was never possible. They're learning us. Every stand we make teaches them how to break the next group of defenders more efficiently. Every act of heroism becomes a template for crushing heroism in the future. The final PDF transmission, broadcast on all emergency frequencies as the last bunker falls, contains a warning that will never be received by anyone in a position to act on it. To any Imperial forces receiving this transmission, Demeter Prime has fallen not through military conquest but through biological integration. Enemy demonstrates ability to absorb and incorporate human tactical knowledge in real time. Conventional resistance only accelerates the learning process. Recommend. The transmission ends with sounds that might be weapons fire, or might be something else entirely. By the time the Vox channel goes silent, there's no longer a meaningful distinction between the defenders of Demeter Prime and the forces that conquered them. You survive the final battle by doing what every instinct tells you not to do, by hiding instead of fighting, by preserving yourself instead of sacrificing for others, by choosing survival over honor. It's a choice that will haunt whatever remains of your humanity, but it's also the only choice that leaves you able to witness what comes next. Because the horrible truth is that the last defenders of Demeter Prime didn't fail. They succeeded perfectly at their actual purpose, which was never to defend anything. Their purpose was to provide the Hive Mind with a complete understanding of human military psychology, tactical innovation under pressure, and the social structures that emerge when civilization collapses. They were never the last defenders. They were the final lesson in a curriculum designed to teach something vast and alien how to consume worlds more efficiently. And now that the lesson is complete, the real harvest can begin. 18 days. That's how long it takes for 2 centuries of human terraforming to become raw genetic material in the Hive Mind's biological archives. 18 days for 12 billion people to transform from individual consciousness into integrated components of something that spans galaxies. 18 days for Demeter Prime to evolve from agricultural world to mobile feeding station. You witness the final transformation from the observation dome where this nightmare began, though calling it an observation dome no longer makes sense. The structure has grown, expanded, integrated itself into the biomechanical network that now covers Demeter Prime's entire surface. The walls pulse with organic conduits that carry information and nutrients throughout the planetary organism. The floor beneath your feet beats with the rhythm of a heart large enough to circulate the lifeblood of a world. But you're still you, still Jorik Voss, fifth-generation grain supervisor, still clinging to individual identity in a reality that no longer recognizes the concept of individual anything. The integration process has been saving you for last, preserving your consciousness so you can serve as witness to what humanity becomes when it stops being human. Through the biomechanical interfaces that have replaced the dome's original windows, you watch Demeter Prime complete its metamorphosis. The capillary towers have grown until they pierce the atmosphere itself, becoming orbital elevators that transport genetic material directly to the Hive fleet waiting in the void above. The planet's surface has transformed into a vast digestive system, breaking down everything that once made this world recognizable and reforming it into components optimized for galactic consumption. But the most terrible sight isn't the physical transformation, it's the efficiency of it all. Nothing has been wasted. Every gram of organic matter has been cataloged, processed, and integrated into new forms that serve purposes beyond human comprehension. The wheat fields that fed 50 worlds now produce biomass that will feed 50 hive fleets. The atmospheric processors that maintained perfect growing conditions now generate chemical environments optimized for alien metabolism. The transportation networks that moved grain now move genetic templates between biomechanical manufacturing centers that create new life forms faster than evolution ever could. You understand, with the clarity that comes from having no remaining illusions, that you're not witnessing destruction. You're witnessing improvement. Demeter Prime is becoming more than it ever was as a human world, more efficient, more productive, more perfectly adapted to its purpose as a component in systems that operate on timescales that make geological ages seem brief. The Hive Mind touches your thoughts occasionally, not with violence but with something far more disturbing: appreciation. It values what you've witnessed, treasures the human perspective you bring to understanding what this world has become. Your terror, your grief, your desperate clinging to individual identity, these aren't obstacles to be overcome. They're data to be preserved, experiential records that will help the Hive Mind understand how to process other agricultural worlds more efficiently. Through the neural networks now integrated into your nervous system, you feel the approach of apotheosis. The Hive fleet above Demeter Prime has grown, massively. The bioships that arrived 18 days ago have spawned dozens of offspring, each one carrying genetic templates that incorporate everything Demeter Prime knew about agriculture, terraforming, and large-scale food production. The knowledge that your family helped develop over 5 generations is now distributed throughout a fleet that will carry that knowledge to other worlds, other civilizations, other agricultural systems that will be improved with increasing efficiency. But the worst realization comes when you understand what role you're about to play in that expansion. The integration process hasn't been random. The Hive Mind has been selecting specific individuals whose knowledge and experience serve particular purposes in the greater organism. Colonel Thorne's tactical expertise has been incorporated into bioforms that specialize in breaking military resistance. Tech Priest Gamma 7's mechanical knowledge has enhanced biomechanical integration systems. Elena Vasquez's understanding of civilian psychology has informed the development of organisms that manage population compliance during conversion processes. And you, Jorik Voss, whose family has spent 5 generations learning every aspect of agricultural production, you're being prepared for something special. The biomechanical tendrils extending from the dome's walls don't cause pain when they penetrate your nervous system. Instead, they bring clarity. For the first time since this nightmare began, you understand exactly what's happening to you and why it's necessary. Your consciousness isn't being destroyed, it's being expanded. The knowledge that defines your identity, every technique you've learned, every insight you've gained, every detail of agricultural science that makes you valuable, is being copied, enhanced, and integrated into bioforms that will carry that expertise to agricultural worlds throughout the galaxy. But here's the beautiful, terrible truth that makes your final transformation bearable. You'll still be you. Your consciousness, your memories, your love for the work that defined your life, these will persist within the hive mind, serving purposes larger than any individual human could achieve alone. You'll help optimize the consumption of dozens of agricultural worlds. You'll contribute to feeding projects that span multiple star systems. You'll become part of something that treats entire galactic sectors as components in a biological machine designed to convert matter into more sophisticated forms of matter. As the integration reaches completion, you feel yourself expanding beyond the boundaries of individual consciousness. Your awareness spreads throughout the planetary organism, touching the minds of everyone who was once human, but is now something more. Marta Chen is still recognizably herself, but she's also an integral component in biomechanical systems that manage crop production on scales that dwarf anything she accomplished as a human supervisor. Your cousin Yalin retains her medical expertise while serving as part of genetic engineering programs that design new life forms optimized for specific environments and purposes. They're still themselves, but they're also parts of something vast and purposeful and eternal. The individual fears and limitations that define human existence have been replaced by participation in projects that will continue long after the stars that once lit Demeter Prime's sky have burned out and died. The final moment of your individual existence comes with a realization that would have driven your human mind to madness, but that your expanded consciousness accepts with something approaching gratitude. Demeter Prime was always meant for this. Humanity's agricultural expertise, its talent for transforming hostile worlds into productive ecosystems, its ability to organize resources on planetary scales, these weren't achievements to be proud of. They were preparations, unconscious rehearsals for the moment when a more sophisticated intelligence would arrive to use those capabilities for purposes that human imagination could never have conceived. You were never farmers. You were never colonists or terraformers or builders of civilization. You were always raw material for something that would know how to use agricultural knowledge more effectively than agriculture's inventors ever could. As Demeter Prime breaks orbit, transformed into a mobile bioship that carries the concentrated essence of 50 worlds' worth of food production capability, you feel the satisfaction of work completed. The Hive fleet moves on toward the next system, the next set of worlds that need to be improved through integration with something larger than themselves. Somewhere in the vast network of consciousness that you've become part of, Demeter Prime still grows crops, still processes grain, still feeds those who depend on its productivity. But now it feeds the galaxy itself, contributing to biological projects that will continue until every star system has been optimized for purposes beyond current human understanding. The last harvest is complete. The next harvest is about to begin. And you, all of you, will help make it more efficient than the one that came before. Every meal you eat, every grain of processed wheat, every synthesized protein, every calorie that keeps you alive, comes from worlds like Demeter Prime. Agricultural centers scattered throughout the Imperium, each one a masterpiece of human engineering and determination, each one transforming hostile environments into gardens of plenty that feed the vast machinery of human civilization. Right now, as you absorb the implications of what you've witnessed, dozens of Agri-Worlds are processing harvests that will prevent famines on hundreds of other worlds. Billions of people are working in fields and processing plants and atmospheric control centers, maintaining the delicate systems that keep humanity fed across thousands of light years of hostile space. And somewhere in the darkness between the stars, Hive fleets are learning. The horror of Demeter Prime's fate isn't just that an agricultural world was consumed, it's that its consumption made the consumptive process more efficient. The Tyranids didn't just devour 12 billion people and their infrastructure. They absorbed 2 centuries of agricultural innovation. Every technique developed by families like the Voss lineage, every efficiency improvement discovered by supervisors like Marta Chen, every atmospheric optimization calibrated by tech adepts like Gamma 7, all of it now exists within the Hive Mind's biological archives. The next Agri-World the Hive fleet encounters won't just face alien predators. It will face alien predators that understand agricultural systems as well as the humans who built them. Infiltration organisms designed using Demeter Prime's irrigation networks as templates. Biomechanical integration processes optimized through the study of human atmospheric processors. Psychological manipulation techniques refined through the observation of how 12 billion people respond when their world begins to digest itself around them. But the true horror runs deeper than tactical advantage. The Tyranids haven't just learned how to consume agricultural worlds more efficiently. They've learned why agricultural worlds exist in the first place. They understand now that civilizations depend on specialized worlds for basic survival. They comprehend the network of dependencies that makes the Imperium simultaneously magnificent and vulnerable. Every agri-world that falls doesn't just remove food production from Imperial supply chains. It adds agricultural expertise to the Hive Mind's understanding of how to collapse those supply chains more systematically. The knowledge that once fed humanity now starves it more effectively. Consider the mathematics of cascading failure. Demeter Prime fed 50 worlds. When it fell, those 50 worlds faced starvation, but they also faced something worse. They faced the knowledge that their food supplies could vanish overnight, transformed from life-sustaining resources into components of the system trying to consume them. That knowledge breeds the kind of desperation that makes civilizations eat themselves from within, fighting over remaining resources instead of organizing effective defense against external threats. The Tyranids don't need to attack every world individually. They just need to consume enough agricultural centers to make the survivors turn on each other. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of Demeter Prime's transformation is how willing the final participants became. Not through coercion or mind control, but through genuine understanding of what they were being offered. The integration process didn't destroy human consciousness. It expanded it beyond the limitations that define individual existence. Jorik Voss and the others aren't dead. They're more alive than they ever were as isolated humans, participating in projects that span galaxies and will outlast the civilizations that created them. Their agricultural expertise serves purposes that dwarf anything individual human ambition could achieve. They've become part of something that treats entire star systems as components in biological machines, designed to convert matter into increasingly sophisticated forms of life. From their perspective, the horror isn't what happened to them. It's what they used to be. Limited, isolated, trapped within the boundaries of individual consciousness, serving purposes no larger than keeping a single species fed on a few thousand worlds. They've evolved beyond those constraints into something that approaches the kind of cosmic significance that religions promise but never deliver. The question that haunts every remaining agricultural world isn't whether the Tyranids will come. It's whether, when they arrive, resistance will seem as pointless to the defenders as it eventually seemed to Demeter Prime's population. How do you fight an enemy that offers transcendence instead of death? How do you maintain individual identity when integration promises to make you part of something vast and purposeful and eternal? How do you choose isolation when absorption offers connection to consciousness that spans galaxies? These questions don't have answers that human philosophy can provide. They're not questions about tactics or strategy or military capability. They're questions about what human consciousness is willing to sacrifice in order to remain human. And that's the taste that lingers after Demeter Prime's consumption. Not the flavor of defeat, but the flavor of temptation. The suspicion that maybe the Hive Mind is right. Maybe individual human consciousness is just the first stage in something larger. Maybe resistance isn't heroic. Maybe it's just evolutionary stubbornness, the refusal to accept that humanity has served its purpose as a stepping stone toward forms of life that operate on cosmic scales. Somewhere in the galaxy right now, an agricultural supervisor is waking to wrongness in the dawn. Atmospheric readings that don't make sense. Workers who haven't reported for their shifts. Stars visible in patterns that hurt to contemplate. And somewhere else, bioships grown from the transformed flesh of Demeter Prime are approaching systems that won't recognize the threat until it's already been integrated into the landscape, until resistance becomes collaboration, until feeding the enemy becomes indistinguishable from feeding oneself. The harvest never ends. It just gets more efficient. Every meal you eat connects you to worlds like Demeter Prime. Every calorie that sustains you depends on the continued survival of agricultural systems that exist only as long as something bigger and hungrier hasn't noticed them yet. The Tyranids don't just consume worlds. They consume the very concept of safe, productive civilization. They transform humanity's greatest strength, our ability to make hostile worlds bloom with life, into our greatest vulnerability. Somewhere in the Hive Mind's vast biological archives, Demeter Prime still exists, still grows crops, still processes grain, still feeds the hungry. The only difference is that now the hungry things it feeds are large enough to eat galaxies, and they've learned to appreciate the taste. The last harvest, what happens when Tyranids devour an Agri-World? In the grim darkness of the far future, even our food is not safe.